So, good evening. Warm welcome to each one of you to this monthly session for the consultants. And the series is actually branded as Understanding Series to help the consultants to improve their understanding on quality infrastructure, whether it is the international framework or the national frameworks, to be in alignment with world trade practices, and then the standards, certifications, and many other things. So the series got started last month we had the first session on TBT agreement, which is again a WTO mandate, and the session today is actually on SPS agreement. So thank you so much for joining us, and we welcome Ms. Shashi Sharin, and ma'am is from, I'll just do a brief introduction. Ms. Shashi Sharin, she is an expert in this particular domain, and she was the former director of EIC, which is the Export Inspection Council, and FAO Bangkok. I think this is that food sector organization, no, ma'am. It is Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. So she's also a former director of FAO Bangkok, and she's been into this domain on understanding the global infrastructure on the standards and the trade practices linked to standard certifications and all these things. So maybe let us try to understand what the SPS is all about, and then see how it is applicable, relevant, and to which sectors, and then national requirement or whether it is an international requirement and all this. So thank you so much for joining us, ma'am. And we're just looking forward to have your session. Over to you, please. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And good evening, everyone. This is now the second session, as already explained. The first one was on the TBT, and this is the SPS agreement. So I will bring out the presentation. So what I would actually be talking on is what is I would introduce the WTO SPS agreement to you, and bring out some of the objective of this and some important features of this, and then add on what are the implications to developing countries, including India. Okay, I'm still not able to share my screen, so I'm struggling a little bit. Is it visible?
Yes, ma'am, it's visible, ma'am.
Okay, fine, great. So I'm trying to get rid of my screen. Okay, just an introduction first, that we are all aware of the WTO, which was established, and the basic purpose of this was to dismantle the barriers for free flow of trade. So we are interested in free flow of trade, and we are aware that there is a huge global market today, high cross-border trade, and in the food sector alone, there is almost trade of 1,486 billion US dollars, and this is a figure of 2014, which was published in 2015 by the WTO. Now, with this global market and this global cross-border trade, there's a high potential not only for transmission of transport of food products or sending food products across, but also contaminants spread along with the food product. And because of the spread of these contaminants, countries are giving a lot of importance to the quality, health, safety issues, and these are very high on the global agenda. So countries need to see, the governments need to see that the food which is being imported into their country, it is safe and healthy and of the right quality. So the governments are imposing requirements on the foods coming into their countries. So basically, those are the regulatory ones, and in terms of health and safety. So that is what the government is imposing. In addition, there is the private sector. They're also imposing standards for competitive advantage. For example, like when you have these retailers, or what you have just talked before this about Alibaba. So they have their own retail chains, and they have their standards also, which they are imposing. So these national regulations and voluntary standards, so both are there, and these are causing an impact on trade, especially for the developing countries and also for the developed countries. Now, because of all these regulations and standards and the need to see that countries are not using these standards indiscriminately, certain rules and disciplines are being laid down. And these are what you call the non-tariff agreement. So internationally, these are the rules and regulations to see that countries do not indiscriminately use standards or regulations to protect their countries from the foods entering into their areas or territories. And there are three or four such agreements. You've already heard about the technical barriers to trade agreement earlier. In addition to that, there is the SPS agreement, which is sanitary and phytosanitary measures. And more recently, another agreement has been uh, recently enacted by the WTO, which is the Trade Facilitation Agreement. So, what I'm going to be covering here is I would talk in detail about the SPS agreement. What are the important features, the objectives, the rights and obligations under this, and the key provisions, including the annexes. So, the annexes are a basic part of the main agreement, and they're included when you talk about the agreement. I will give you a little bit of interrelationship, a couple of slides with TBT and the trade facilitation agreements. And then I have a couple of slides on the implications on developing countries and international trade. So agreement on the application of SPS measures, this was negotiated in parallel with major agriculture trade negotiations, and it came into force in 1995 along with the TBT agreement and the pre-shipment inspection agreement, the PSI agreement, which also was also mentioned in the last session. Now this SPS agreement, it, it applies to all measures used to protect three areas: the human, the animal, and the plant life and health, which may directly or indirectly affect trade. So I would be defining and showing you what we mean by measures in the next slide. So what exactly what do we mean by an SPS measure? Now this has been defined in the annex. So I told you the annex are an integral part of this agreement, and Annex A defines what a measure is. So an SPS measure is a measure which is taken to protect a couple of things. So it protects the human or the animal life or health from what? From risks which may arise from different aspects like additives, contaminants, pesticides, toxins, and microorganisms in the food, the beverage, or the feedstuff. So here you see we are covering not only food and beverage, but also the feeds, animal feeds and feedstuffs. So this is one aspect. The second aspect is preventing the human life or health from diseases. So plant or animal carried diseases. The third is protection of the animal or the plant life or health. So it's not only we are looking at human life or health through food or through diseases, but we are also looking at the animal or plant life or health. And what are we protecting them from? The pest diseases or disease causing organisms. And then the agreement also addresses the country. So the health of the country is also addressed, and a measure also protects the country from damage caused by entry or establishment and spread of pests. So it's basically you're looking at the human health, you're looking at the animal life and health, and you're looking at the plant life and health, and you're looking at the whole country as a whole, that it should not have um, entry of or spread of pests and diseases which do not exist in that country. So these are the different aspects, and this is what the SPS agreement basically addresses. Now, in the definition, you have some important footnotes. So when we talk of animals, when we talk of plants, when we talk of pests, and when we talk of contaminants, so animals would include the fishery side and the wild animals or wild fauna. Plants would include the forest and wild flora. The pests would include weeds, and the contaminants would include a host of things like pesticide, veterinary drug residues, etc., toxins, heavy metals, and the like. Now, when we look at a measure, what exactly do we mean by a measure? Measure to protect. So normally you would picturize it as when we are saying that we are trying to protect the human beings, or you're trying to protect the animals, or you're trying to protect the pests. From what? What are the types of measures that you'll put in place? So mostly a person would think of specifications, the end product specifications. That is the first thing which comes into mind, like we would say pesticide residues, or we would say veterinary drug residues, or we will talk about the X beetle not coming into the country. But in addition to that, there are a host of other things. So only one aspect is the end product specification or criteria. In addition, the measures also include the production methods, the processing methods, the testing methods, sampling, inspection, certification and approval procedures, conformity assessment procedures, risk assessment methods, quarantine treatments, and packaging and labeling requirements, etc., etc. So anything which would actually lead to uh, a food safety issue, or a animal health issue, or a plant health issue, or a country introduction of pests and pest controls. So all those, any type of such issues would be covered as measures. Okay, I'll take this later. Now, what are the objectives of the SPS agreement? Three main areas are covered. One is to protect and improve the current human health, animal health, and phytosanitary situation of all member countries. When we say human health and animal health is very clear. Phytosanitary situation relates to the plant health situation of member countries. Second is to protect the members from any arbitrary or unjustifiable discrimination. Discrimination due to what? Due to different measures, that is sanitary and phytosanitary standards or requirements or regulatory requirements. So members have to be protected from other members, including or putting in measures or standards which are not justifiable or which are discriminatory. Discriminatory would mean discriminatory from measures which they have in their own country. For example, if a country has requirements for, let us say, heavy metals like lead, so they cannot discriminate between the specification requirement for lead for products produced in their own country and for products imported from another country. Or they cannot discriminate for products imported from one country vis-a-vis another country. So this is the second basic objective. And the third objective is that to maintain the sovereign right of any government to provide an appropriate level of protection, which means that the country, every country who is a member of the WTO has the right to lay down standards for the level of protection which they deem fit, which is based on certain rules which are given in this agreement also. So countries can set their own standards for health and safety within a gamut of being non-discriminatory and other issues which we will come across, we will go through. So this is the main objectives. That means countries have a right to lay down standards or measures or specifications to protect the health and safety of their human population, plant population, and animal populations and the country. But these should not be discriminatory, and this should be to improve the situation in their country. So this is the basic objective. Now the agreement allows certain basic rights and certain obligations. So countries have a basic right, which we just discussed, that they can lay down. So rights and obligations. So the basic right is they can apply sanitary and phytosanitary measures. That means standards or requirements necessary for the protection of human, animal, and plant life or health. So this is a right. Obligations are that the measures should apply only to the extent necessary. It should not be more than what is required to protect the health and safety of their populations of human, animal, and plant. So that's one obligation. Second is, and they should not be used for protectionary purposes and not result in unnecessary barriers to trade. So the right is you can apply. Obligation is only to the extent necessary, not more than what is needed. The measures or the standards or specifications or requirements should be based on scientific principles. They should not just be irrationally applied, so science-based and risk-based. They should be non-discriminatory, which I explained, should not discriminate between countries and between domestic and imported products, and should not be a disguised restriction on trade. So these are the obligations and the rights. And the balance is in the rights and obligation is provided through science. So scientific principles, risk bases, etc. Now there are a number of key provisions in the agreement. Basically, there are 14 articles. 14 articles. So these are the key areas which are related to the technical aspects. Then there are the administrative aspects or the supporting implementation aspects. So I would go through all of these in the next few slides. And then, as I mentioned, the annexes are an integral part of this. So there are three basic annexes which are there. Annex A gives the definitions. So certain definitions are given, such as measures has been described, which I showed you, sorry. Acceptable level of protection that has been defined, what it means, what is the level of protection that is deemed fit or acceptable, because you can protect your populations with a zero risk, but that is more than what is necessary. So what would be acceptable level of protection? Here again, there would be the scientific basis to it and the risk basis. Risk assessment has been defined, international standards. So which are the international standards used? Again, I'll come back to that. Then Annex B talks of the transparency clause. Again, we would be covering that. And Annex C gives the control, inspection, and approval procedures. Again, we would be coming to that. Now, coming on to harmonization, which is Article 3. So what this agreement says is it encourages countries to use international standards and to base their requirements or measures on international standards. And when they talk of international standards, there are three sisters. There is the Codex Alimentarius Commission, which is operated by FAO and WHO, which is the main organizations. There is the OIE, Organization International de Epizooties, which is for animal health, and there is the IPPC, International Plant Protection Convention, which is for plant health. So the international standards which have been referred to for food safety, animal health, and plant health are the ones which are published by these three organizations. So SPS says, base your standards on these. But in case you want to have more stringent standards, that is higher level of protection, then you need to have a scientific justification or a risk assessment. Otherwise, you're going against the SPS agreement. So as long as your standards are aligned or harmonized with these three organizations' standards for different areas, they are aligned in the harmonization aspect of this agreement. But in case you want to have lenient standards, there is no bar. Any country can have lesser standards or lenient standards than these laid down. But if you want to have a higher level of protection or more stringent standards, then a scientific risk assessment is needed. It says that if the measures are conforming to international standards, you already have the science base. So scientific justification is there because the international bodies are already looking at a scientific basis while developing and laying down publishing standards. Or you need to have a risk assessment done. And again, there are conditions laid down for the risk assessment. How it has to be done, which is it has to be done using the techniques which have been developed by the international organizations. But I'll come to that slide a little later. Okay, this is the risk assessment one. So what the risk assessment article says is that the measures should be based on assessment of risks to human, animal, or plant life or health, taking into account the risk assessment techniques developed by international organizations. So all these three organizations have laid down certain techniques for risk assessment. So those have to be taken into account, and it cannot just be a country goes into their own techniques which don't have a scientific basis. It also says that while you are assessing the risks, you should take into account the available scientific evidence, the process and production methods which are in place in countries, inspection and sampling methods, what is the prevalence of the diseases or pests in your countries. So if you have certain diseases or pests, that needs to be taken into account. If there is a pest-free or disease-free area, you take that into account. And while deciding on the measures also, you also need to take into account relevant economic factors. Now, this is very important because what it says is that if you are allowing a product to come into your country, and that product may spread the pest into your country, you have to look into the economics to see what will it take, what will be the cost for eradicating that pest. So you take into account various economic factors also, and there could be alternate measures. So you look at the cost effectiveness of that also. So when you are establishing measures, you need to look into the risk assessments, look into the scientific evidence, look into the economic and the cost effectiveness of different approaches, and then establish your measures. It also talks of the importance of consistency. So don't have arbitrary or unjustifiable distinctions between countries, between your countries and between other exporting countries. And it says that uh, a country can seek from the importing country the reasons why they have put in measures if it's affecting their exports and if they're not based on international, and the importing country is obliged to give reasons for why they have put in a measure. So they have to show their risk assessment, they have to show their scientific basis, or if they're looking at economic factors or alternate approaches, they need to look into all that and provide this information to the exporting country. So this is what risk assessment is in the SPS agreement. Now, there is one provision which talks of the precautionary principle or provisional measures. So, so what the earlier slide said is that if you are putting in measures which are different or more stringent than the international organization, the measures set by international organizations, you need to do a risk assessment. But there are certain conditions where risk assessment can be avoided or postponed or delayed, and you can put in provisional measures. And there are certain conditions which have been given, which says that when scientific information is not available or is insufficient, and whatever information is available, based on that, you can put in certain measures as a precaution. Like you're not sure what is going to be the risk of that, but as a precautionary principle, you can put those in. But once you have put these in, then you need to look at additional information over a period of time at the earliest. And what it says is within a reasonable period of time, which has not been defined, so that you try and get information on the risk basis and try and get that information and then finalize that measure, the provisional measure. So there is this exceptional clause given. Okay. The next article I talk on is equivalence. Now, this is again a very interesting clause. And what it says is every country cannot have the same measures, and it may not always be very effective. So, uh, it allows members to accept the SPS measures of other members as equivalent, even if they are slightly different, if the exporting country can demonstrate that its measures achieve the same level of protection, acceptable or allowable level of protection as the importing country. What this means is, now let me try and see if I can give you an example for this. For example, now if there is a requirement which has been put in place that HACCP is mandatory, right? Like US has put in a number of places a requirement that when you are exporting into their country, any canned foods, you need to have a HACCP in place in those factories. Now, if the country can show, or if the exporter or the exporting country can show that even though they are not implementing HACCP, but they are implementing other processes in line through which the objective of the importing country, if the objective is to destroy, for example, they are looking at pathogens, or they are looking at good practices being maintained. So if the exporting country can demonstrate that they have put in other practices, not exactly HACCP, then that could be accepted as equivalent, even if it's different. But in this case, the importing country has to be given access for going into the exporting country to be able to see, inspect and test how they are handling that issue. So this provision has been provided for under equivalence. So equivalence basically has two main aspects. One is accepting other members' SPS measures as equivalent, even if they are different from their own. So if they're not the same, but could be similar, or they're achieving the same objective. The second is it talks about equivalence agreements. So what it says is members shall upon request, that means an importing member shall upon request enter into consultations with the aim of achieving bilateral and multilateral agreements or recognition of equivalence of the specified SPS measures. So there we talked of equivalence of a measure, but it's not only a measure, it could be of a whole system. So if an exporting country, so an importing country normally may be checking products coming from the exporting country. But if the exporting country requests the importing country to have an agreement whereby they recognize the measures put in by an exporting country to see that they're equivalent to the importing country measures, the importing country is obliged to enter into consultations. Now, to give you an example here, EIC has agreements with a number of countries, including the US, Turkey, EU, Japan, Korea, for different products or for the whole system, even Australia. So these countries, that is the importing country, doesn't need to check or keep on going into the exporting country to inspect their systems. They have an agreement with the country based on discussions, based on what they have observed, based on the historical um, approval systems, and they've entered into agreement so that the exporting EIC would be certifying the products and the processes on behalf uh, to meet requirements of the importing country. So this is the concept of equivalence agreements, and this clause talks about these two aspects. Now, this is another very important clause, the regionalization or disease-free areas. Now, what this basically, I won't read it out because it's quite confusing, but what it says is that due to different climatic conditions or pest or disease situations in countries or food safety conditions in countries, it's not always appropriate to have the same SPS requirements or provisions imposed on different countries. For example, if one country is not using pesticides, another country is using rampantly pesticides. So the importing country need not give the requirement of pesticide residue or check the pesticide residues from the first country, because then in any case not spraying pesticides. So this is again an exceptional thing where you can have different measures on different countries because of the conditions which are existing in different countries or areas. So this clause recognizes that either it's a country or it could be an area. There is some area which is free from pests or free from diseases. For example, again, a simpler example would be avian influenza. So if there is an area where you don't have it, or the BSC, you don't have it, so you don't have to test all the products for these aspects while importing from these countries. Whereas if another country or a region or an area has avian influenza, then the importing country can test. So you're giving a little different treatment to both, but that is because there is a regionalization or disease-free area concept which exists. Okay, here we have a little more guidelines which are given in the document which I have mentioned here. Okay, transparency is another very important article, Article 7, and I told you one of the annexes covers this transparency aspect. So what this says is that members shall notify other members of new or changed SPS regulations in a prescribed format. So if a country is coming out with a new measure or they're changing some measure, for example, let's say India has put in some additional pesticide residues for fruits and vegetables. So they are obliged to do certain things. So they're obliged to notify the other members of these changes. Now, under what conditions do they have to notify? If they have put a new regulation and there is no international standard on that product, or it is different from an international standard, and the regulation has a significant effect on trade. Now, if it is the same or it is based on or it is harmonized with the international standard, then the members are not obliged to notify. It also says, and how will you notify? So there are two aspects again to it. One is a national notification authority has to be designated by every country. So every country has to have a notification authority, and any measure which has been laid down by any organization in the country which has an impact on trade, which has a significant impact on trade, has to be notified through this notification authority to the WTO. So one requirement is that every country needs to have a notification authority. And the second requirement is that inquiry points need to be established. And what is the purpose of these inquiry points? The purpose is that if any other member wants to have information about the laws, the regulations, the notifications of any country, the reasons why these have been put, they should be able to contact the inquiry point. Now in India, you have inquiry points under the Ministry of Health, the Food Safety Authority for food safety issues. You have under the Animal Husbandry for animal health issues, and the plant side, Ministry of Agriculture for the phytosanitary issues. So India has 3 inquiry points. There are countries who have a single inquiry point, but whatever the system, it doesn't bar you from having one or more, but basically all the areas should be covered and there should be good coordination. So this is the transparency article. So this is when do you notify? So in case you are issuing a regular measure, that is normally following the procedure to issue measures, you need to notify to the WTO well in time when modifications to the notification is still possible, to the measure is still possible. The purpose of this notification is that the countries which are going to trade with you, they should know about this well in advance. They should have an opportunity to comment on this well in advance. And it also says that you have to reasonably take into account, discuss their suggestions or their comments and address it. So normally it says reasonable time is given for comments, but now this has been put as a 60-day period minimum. There is also, as I mentioned, provisional measures or emergency notifications, which need to come out immediately. So there the 60-day time is not needed and they can bring out the notification, but immediately inform to the WTO and other member countries who have an interest in this. And when the country is ratifying this or considering when more data is available, then any comments from these countries should also be taken into account. So this is about the transparency. Then there is the control, inspection, and approval procedures, or what we can say conformity assessment aspects. So this is given under Article 8, and also one of the annexes addresses this, so Annex C. So basic points under this are that when products are being imported, there should be no undue delay in taking the products in. So it should not lie at the customs or the uh, place of imports unduly. So you have to address it well within quickly. And the procedure for importing should be published. So it should be a published procedure, and it should be informed to countries. Again, it would have been informed to the WTO, but again, this should be informed to the exporter of the other country as well as the importers in your country. Sometimes the customs or the various departments who have to clear it are asking for information. So this clause talks about only information should be limited to what is necessary. No unnecessary information should be asked for. What is so limited to what is necessary for the purpose of clearing the consignment. Another part of this is that no less favorable treatment should be given for imports. So no discrimination from imports from vis-a-vis different countries, and also what you have for domestic and imports. And when we are talking of no less favorable treatment, you're looking at what is the procedure followed, what are the fees. So the fees should be equitable to what you're charging your domestic people when you do inspections within the country. And they should only cover the costs. So even if you need to have more tests to be carried out, but it should only cover the costs, and you cannot just make profits out of it. And it also talks about confidentiality, that the information should remain confidential, and again, no discrimination between domestic and between countries. Uh, the next clause talks about that if the control is specified at the level of production, which means control in the exporting country, then the exporting country has to provide assistance to allow the importing country to do the inspection or the checking. And there has to be a procedure for complaints. Okay, I think I need to go a little faster now. There is the clause on technical assistance, where it talks about members providing technical assistance, especially to developing country and the least developed country members, basically to allow them to come up to the requirements of the importing country and expand their market access opportunities. So the assistance can be in different forms, and it could be through bilaterally between countries or through international organization. So the country, that means the importing developed country like the EU, they can give assistance to India, which is still a developing country, via FAO or WHO or other developmental international partners. This is the special and differential treatment. It's very similar to the TBT agreement. So here it says that the developed countries should take into account the needs of developing countries when they are developing their measures, and allow them a little longer time frames to meet their requirements, to meet the additional or more stringent requirements. And this can be done on request. Then these are the two clauses on administrative, which is consultation and dispute settlement, and the administration, which is through the SPS committee. And this committee meets regularly. I think it's 3 monthly, to implement the provisions of the agreement, to discuss any clarifications needed, to come out with clarification and clarification documentation. And in this committee, the decision is by consensus based on the members which are present when the decision is being taken, and no one voices an objection. So in a nutshell, their basic rights and their obligations and important clauses are harmonize with the international standards. But if you want more stringent, base it on a risk assessment, provision for adapting to regional conditions. So you can have a little difference based on regional conditions. Transparency is needed, which means you need to notify, you need to have these the measures available transparently, and every country should be aware of them. There is the provision of equivalence, technical assistance, and special and differential treatments. So this is the agreement. Now, just to tell you how these interact with the TBT and the um, trade facilitation agreement. So both the so now we see that they can cover similar areas like SPS and TB. The TBT agreement is very broad. It'll cover every item, every area, the technical regulations, which are the mandatory standards, the voluntary standards, and the conformity assessment procedures. The reach is very broad, but we are looking at in relation to human, animal, and plant health. Where is it that SPS measures are used and where is it that TBT measures are used? So this is an area where most countries get a little confused. So I've given some examples which may help in understanding. Now, if there is a labeling requirement, if the labeling relates to food safety, for example, if it says store, if it's a meat product and it says store the product at 4 degrees or 4 degrees centigrade, what happens if you don't store at 4? It'll be a safety issue. There could be pathogens that could go bad. So that would come under the SPS agreement. Uh, while if it is like, what is the nutritional value of a food, meat food? So if that is given, that is not a food safety issue. So that would be covered under the TBT or the sizes. I'll give you one more example of pesticides. Suppose pesticides have been applied. So if you're laying down the limit for residues, you lay down the limit of pesticide residues because of food safety issues. But if you are laying down the method for handling, how do you handle the pesticide? Or what is the efficacy of the pesticide? Then that is not a food safety issue, so it will be covered under the TBT agreement. So you need to see if it's covered under the SPS agreement, and it's covered if it's a human, animal, or health uh, safety issue. And if it is not a food safety issue or animal or human health or safety issue, then it's covered under the TBT agreement. So this is how you would determine. Now, a little bit on the trade facilitation agreement and what is the link. So this basically, this agreement, I think it's come out into very late, just a couple of years back. I think 2016, if I'm not mistaken. This relates to simplification of trade procedures so as to move goods and cross-border trade more efficiently. So we are basically looking at the customs point. And so this agreement is mostly implemented by customs, and there are 24 articles. Now, agriculture and food products and animal health and animal and plant products, they are governed by the SPS agreement. So you have a role of different implementing agencies who look after food safety, plant, animal health, for example, the Agriculture Ministry, the Animal uh, Husbandry, and the Food Safety. So these ministries or these departments would be looking at the border points before they allow the product to enter into their country. So that is where the customs and these border SPS implementing agencies would be interacting. So under this agreement, even if you simplify all the procedures for the border controls and the customs, but if these agencies have their own requirements which do not allow the product to enter the country till they have done their own checks, things cannot work out. So this agreement actually works at the customs, and customs is supposed to develop a system with the border control agencies to see that there are no hurdles in product coming into the country. So you need good coordination between these on clarity of their roles in relation to border control, simplification of procedures, possibly having a good e-based or web-based system of communication. So if a decision is made at the border point, it again goes to the animal health or the plant health or the food safety department, and then it comes back again to the customs to allow the consignment to come through. And on this, we are working a project through the US Department of Agriculture in Bangladesh now to establish this system. So there are different assistance being given to establish this. Now I have two more slides. What are the implications of the SPS agreement to India and developing countries? So one of the areas, harmonization. They're looking at harmonization of standards of measures. So when a country needs to harmonize with international standards, the country needs to also see that they participate in international standards development process so that the viewpoint of the country can be listened to or heard at that level. So this participation is important. And again, India has been participating for last few years in all the three uh, organizations, the sister organizations, but again, it needs to be further intensified. Providing data is a very important area because, as I mentioned, the standards are science-based, risk-based. So for these risk bases, data is needed from different countries. Normally what happens, the data comes from the developed countries, and based on that data, they would form the standard. They would develop the standard or the measure. So it is very important for developing countries also to provide data. And the third important area is when we talk of harmonization, it's not only with the international standard, it's also within the country. So in our own country, let's say there are different organizations which are developing standards for different areas. And there is some amount of overlap. For example, the Animal Husbandry Department does have some requirements for import of animal products. But those products have also to meet the requirements laid down by the Food Safety and Standards Authority. So it's important that within the country we harmonize. Within the provinces, you have harmonization of standards. The second area, transparency requirements. So here, one of the basic concerns is that we need to notify, countries need to notify to WTO, as mentioned, any new or any changes in SPS measures. But again, it is not only the health ministry or the agriculture, there could be any other organizations. For example, the EIC may be coming out with some regulations. It could be AgMark, which comes out with something. So all these organizations need to ensure that there is coordinated notification when any of them comes out with a new measure. And normally it's seen that this coordination is not there in most countries. The next point on transparency is many other countries are bringing out their own notifications. How often do we look into their notifications? Like they notify to the WTO, WTO again would be sending to countries. But many a times these notifications are not really studied in depth. So countries need to study these and comment on other country notifications. So normally we wake up when the notification has already become a measure. There are also problems of foreign language and translation of these. Okay, there are multiple measures in a country, as mentioned. We have been trying to see where we can find the complete consolidated set of measures so that for ease of exporters, for ease of importers, for ease of countries, and it's not very easy to find this. So consolidation is very important for this transparency provision to be implemented. And there is the risk basis. There is the risk basis, risk assessments and scientific basis. So either it's not done in many countries well enough, and often it's done but not shared, and how scientifically it's done. There are issues relating to the laboratories, inspection and accreditation systems. Again, India is still very much advanced in this area, but most of the countries in this region, the developing countries, don't have much of a system here. Agreements, we do have some agreements, but it's important to uh, develop agreements with countries where trade is increasing or has increased so that rejections are lower, duplications between the two countries are avoided. So this requires focus. Capacity building, again, infrastructure capacity is one area when we talk of capacity building, but manpower is more important. And I suppose this series of talks also would be capacity building of manpower. But where there is importance of this is like the rules are laid down mostly in the center and implementation is in the states in all three areas: food safety, animal health, plant health. So uh, the persons at the central level are generally well versed and they do understand the risk basis, the basis of setting the standards, how to implement the systems. But at the state level, the transmission of all that training is needs a little more emphasis. In India, as in most countries, yes, the developing countries, but in India also. And then there is the issue of voluntary standards. Um, we look at mandatory regulatory standards, but in addition to that, in addition to what is brought out by the government, there are voluntary standards also in the country, which does cause duplication, which does cause conflict, which does cause overlap. For example, the good agriculture practice standards, there's the organic standards, then there would be standards by associations. So we need to study this and look into it and address these. And the WTO SPS committee and WTO has tried looking into this because this has become an important area for them also. A lot of countries have raised this because even if the governments are implementing measures which are based on risk analysis and based on harmonization with the international standard setting bodies, but the private buyers and the private suppliers, they have their own set of standards which don't follow all these rules. So they are trying to see how there could be discussions between the global food safety uh, authority, GFSI, as well as the regulatory bodies at the WTO level to see how they can rationalize and not bring out more stringent standards, especially in relation to health and safety. So these are some of the implication one needs to look into. And I think I've really overshot my time, so I'd like to thank you. Thank you.
Ma'am, who are the members of the just SPS agreement? Member countries, I mean, almost all countries across the world, or very
All countries, I think currently there are 164 member countries.
ah,
Most of them do not actually participate. They send their embassies, which are there in Geneva, to participate. So it's important that the technical person from India is sent to participate in this, especially when there are issues of concern. But otherwise, every country
ah,
has a right to participate and they can participate. And in addition to this, when an issue is raised,
ah,
then there is an expert group which is set up
hmm,
and they would look into the issue to address it, especially if there's a conflict between countries. So under the dispute settlement, they do have a panel which has experts on it.
can we just say, ma'am, like animal health is one of those human health, animal health, plant health, and these are the things around which this SPS agreements are built. For example, I'm just asking, take the case of COVID, right?
Yeah.
So, is it not a clear case of this which falls under this SPS agreement? At least China, if it is a member country, and maybe something related to the animal health or the disease that's, I mean, it started there and it's affecting the entire world. So, typically, these are all the cases which also fall under the purview of this SPS agreements.
No, this will not come into that because we are looking at the from the food feed, the beverage. So it has to, it is what is causing the safety aspects to the health of the populations, but it does not cover uh, animal health in terms of, and plant health, animal health and human health in terms of medical interventions, which may come under the TBT agreement. Like even rabies would not come under this. So those are
So, oh,
mostly,
sorry.
this is in relation to food and agriculture and animal and plant health, which is used for consumption or spreading of the disease for food production purposes. So it is, we are looking at trade in food and beverages and feeds.
Okay, but I mean, the first slide or the second slide, the first two slides, second or third slide, I don't remember. It was talking about something, diseases that are being generated from the animals also.
Yeah, but which
Huh?
has an impact on the trade of food. So at one point we are talking of the
Okay.
trade of food. right?
Okay.
So you're talking of which may directly or indirectly affect trade.
Okay.
I think this slide may be okay. So measures like protection of the environment, consumer interests other than health, animal welfare are not covered under the SPS agreement, but maybe TBT measures. So maybe this would be a useful slide.
Okay. Maybe technically right.
Yeah.
It may come under. So the ones, I mean, the ones which are not under SPS, they go under a broader category TBT
Yeah,
agreement.
absolutely. Yeah.
How effective are these agreements, ma'am? Actually, how the member countries, because you're saying that embassies will send their representative, but unless otherwise they are from this domain, at least, what will they represent? I'm just wondering.
See, I'll tell you what happens.
Hmm.
If a country has interest in a subject, or if they've had problems, uh,
Uh,
SPS related problems, like we had problems when the EU was rejecting our
uh,
products due to, let's say, one of the issues on which they were rejecting was that
uh,
they were testing they had higher standards at different ports, right? So
mm,
different ports, they were having different measures.
mm,
So that was a cause of concern. And then we took up the issue. And then there was the issue of, I think you would remember, the export of mangoes to US.
mm.
Was not accepting mangoes from India. So then
Right.
that went again to the SPS committee. Then, of course, India sent a very strong delegation there. And
Oh,
today countries, if when countries are affected, like when they're exporting and the products get rejected due to one of these SPS, due to measures by other countries which do not seem justified, then first the countries would take it up bilaterally. If they cannot sort it out, then they can put it to the WTO. And then they set up under the dispute settlement mechanism, it's there. And again, the SPS committee meets to discuss various types of issues which countries have raised so that they come out with guidelines. For example, remember I told you that uh, 60 days for comments, you have to circulate to get for 60 days for comments. Now, where has this been decided? It's not in the agreement, but it has been discussed in the SPS committee and a decision taken. So very often in these committees, if there is a matter of interest,
okay.
in fact, the animal health people have been going very frequently, and even the plant protection.
Mm,
They've
mm.
been going quite frequently. But if there's no interest in a subject, then it's the embassy, and the views are sent from the Indian government to the embassy to take up. Because these meetings are every once in 3 months, which is very high.
Okay. Do the member countries really, I mean, honestly, do they oblige all this, the rules and those committees recommendations and or because trade wars are increasing, especially after this COVID, and more trade wars will erupt actually. So all this TBT agreements, SPS agreements, do member countries really honor all this, ma'am?
They have to honor. If they don't, you can take it up, and then again, it's an embarrassment for them once it's taken up at the WTO dispute settlement. So they try not to reach that stage. And I would say, like at least 90 to 95%, it is honored.
Mm.
And in fact, even the codex and the OIE and the IPPC, their importance has come up because of this agreement. Otherwise, very few countries used to go and attend these meetings. But today they know they need to attend, get their viewpoint heard, get the standards fixed based on what their data also. So it has become very important.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you. Very detailed and lucid presentation. Maybe any questions anybody can ask. If anyone has got any questions, still all these things are a little dry for us. Actually,
Yeah,
we
yeah,
have to read
definitely.
and little dry, and then we need to really understand and then start connecting it to those the regulations, standards. What comes under regulation? What comes under standards, and all those things. But these are the things which we have to, because unless we understand this framework, at least what these rules and all these agreements, trade agreements are focusing upon, then at least at a national level, we can try to understand whether we are in alignment with some of this or not.
Since 1995, the implementation in India has been pretty high now.
Okay.
When we look at other countries, they're still in a very raw state.
Okay. When you say other countries, do you talking about the ASEAN region or the SAARC countries or across the globe, ma'am? I'm asking
I'm
because.
talking of all developing countries across the globe, but
Okay.
my experience, direct experience has been with the Asian countries,
Okay.
Asia and Asia Pacific countries.
Hmm.
So most of them, other than the developed countries like Japan, South Korea, Australia, New Zealand. But when you look at countries like Laos, Cambodia,
Hmm. Okay.
Bhutan, Nepal, so all the SAARC countries definitely,
Hmm.
and even Philippines, Vietnam. So all of them are in a very raw and elementary stage.
Hmm.
And I would say India and maybe Vietnam is more or less at par. Maybe Philippines is at par, but the other countries would be much less. China, of course, is very well advanced, but they may not have the desire to that extent to follow rules. Yeah, Shobha.
Yeah, a couple of questions. They're a little bit technical. NABCB had nominated me to be part of a study group which visited Brussels as well as a few other uh, places in Italy that was on food safety. When we went to Brussels and there was a meeting with DG Sanco and DG Trade.
Mhm.
And when we asked them a specific question, how do you set the residual limits?
Mhm.
So they simply told us it's risk analysis is done at EFSA.
What? What
Okay,
did you say?
we also happened to go to EFSA.
Uh-huh.
Where we were told about elaborate setup where they get together. There are a number of committees where all the experts from Europe are part of it, and they come out with, for every molecule, say for example, if we take pesticide residue, they'll come up with elaborate risk assessment, etc., etc. And they did share some reports. In fact, they are available on their website. Now, when I just happened to have interest, so I went through the report. Now, the report does not clearly tell what should be the residual limit. Okay, it only talks about the toxicology study, etc., etc. It doesn't give any guideline to that. Now, in fact, that was told when we asked them, then if this is the report, where does it give me this thing? What should be my limit when I'm setting the limit? They simply pointed towards DG Senko. Okay, and unfortunately, we did not go back. We should have actually gone back to them, where I would have definitely asked them, who sets the limit? In fact, we had enough. I have a very bad this thing of asking questions. So we had got a kind of a eerie feeling that when it comes to set whatever may be available on the web, what are EU limits for different pesticides, they do play with those limits when it comes to different countries. For example, when it comes to US, imports from US, they have a little softer stance than when it comes to imports from third world countries. So I don't know that I did not get the feeling that they do this setting of limits very transparently. Um, I don't know whether and we get the brunt of it. I mean, we are at the receiving end of rejections of etc. So I don't know how we tackle this issue. That was one question. Another, I don't know whether I should stop here because I have one more small this thing to share which I came across recently.
Okay, should I answer this first?
Yeah.
So what you are saying, right, as rightly said, EFSA does the scientific risk assessments, right? They will do the
Yeah.
studies, they will do the
Yeah.
scientific part of it.
Yeah.
They are not the risk managers. So the
Huh.
final laying down limits is by the risk managers, which in this case is the SANCO.
Yeah.
SANCO has to take into account the risk assessment done by EFSA plus
Huh.
other factors, right? Other
Okay.
factors could be economic, it could be other factors also, but they have to do it transparently.
Okay.
So
Can
that
they do it different from different countries?
they can't do it different, but we have that clause on regionalization where if US is implementing some food safety measures, which India is not implementing.
Okay.
So the level of checks from US would be lesser than would be from India. They can do that definitely. That is in compliance with the SPS agreement.
Okay.
But it cannot be that if pesticide residue, let's say of uh, one of the pesticides, Aldrin, is X for US and it's Y for India. That cannot be. But the method of number of
Checking.
samples drawn, let's
Ah,
would be
ah.
different because they have confidence there.
Okay.
But
So
they have to show what is the level of confidence they have. And if it's like pests, certain pests may not exist in US, which would be
okay.
existing in India. Then they can
Okay.
have different measures. But they cannot have the end limit as different.
As different. Okay. But that means the conformity assessment measures, they can have different.
Huh?
Depending upon the level. Conformity assessment measures that they utilize can be different.
That could be different.
Okay. Not the limits.
Yeah, and again, just to also mention, even at the codex level, codex
Yeah.
is the risk manager, whereas the scientific committees are the risk assessors.
Okay.
So risk assessors cannot take a decision. The risk manager has given the problem to them. They will do the assessments, come out with the report, and then
Okay.
risk manager will decide, do they want a zero risk? Do they want a 1% risk? What is the level of risk that they're ready to tolerate? And then lay down the limits.
Okay. The second question is, see, invariably now EU does not do much farming. So naturally, they are not using a lot of pesticides, which we would be using because we produce a lot of agri-produce, and our export to EU is very high. For example, so whenever they are not using a pesticide in EU, they simply set the limit as limit of detection of the pest method. I mean, technique used. Now, can we, for example, pesticide X we are using in India, they are not using, so they have set the limit as limit of detection. Can we do a risk assessment and give them a data? Because invariably the limit of detection is much lower than the limit that is set based on risk assessment. So can we give them a data that this is our risk assessment, which says that limit actually should be maybe not 0.1 ppb, it should be 0.1 ppm. So can we give them, and are they obliged to take it?
They're not obliged to take it because if we need to do that, we have to do it through the international organizations, Codex, right? We give our data to Codex. They will give their information to Codex. Codex through their risk assessment committees as well as the risk management, the pesticide residue committee, they will come to a decision where you have those 160 or 70 members who are present. And once that is done, then you can, based on that, then take up with the EU, either with them directly or at the WTO, and then EU will have to give what is the basis they have used and why they want a higher acceptable level of protection, ALOP, than the Codex. So
Okay.
this is the
but most of the times the Codex limits are higher than EU limits.
Codex, higher means less stringent.
Higher means they are, I mean, less stringent than EU.
Yeah. So then, based on that, then you can ask them that they should show what is their risk assessment, and they have to. Then they're obliged to show it.
Who is the body which does all these negotiations?
That's the dispute settlement. Or you can
sorry, not disputes. In India, if we have to take up these matters, which is the organization which takes up these?
It will be the SPS, the contact points, no? It will be the contact point.
So where is it in India?
Again, if you are doing bilateral between EU and India, then EIC can come into play. The Commerce Ministry can come into play. So you can either take it up through the Commerce Ministry, take it up through EIC. But if you want to take it up in Codex, then Codex would be the Food Safety Authority.
Anyway, it makes things pretty clearer. Now, there was one question, one problem which came my way just like that, because somebody asked me an advice. Now, what was happening was this: I have heard from some other source laboratory which is testing that we have stopped a considerable CSAM export was happening from India. which was, I think, governed by the Export Promotion Council for Oilseeds. That's a separate, I think, under commerce. Now, that has stopped for a couple of years, I understand, because EU has found very large levels of ETO, that means ethylene trioxide, which is used as a fumigant. And apparently that has not been sorted out. Now, what has happened is that under organic certification also CCM is exported. Now that goes through EPIDA route. And recently they have found that even their ETO is used, and that obviously is not used by farmer, it is used by the exporter. So now another agency is come into play. So in fact, somebody who is into organic certification asked me this question, that is there a laboratory which tests ETO residues? So why this technical matter is being dealt by two different agencies, though the problem is same? I mean, how do you, so the Ministry of Commerce should coordinate this?
Yeah, I suppose what you're
I
saying
suppose
has
so.
to be coordination, but again, the matter of concern is if it is organic,
Yeah.
then it should not be. I mean, that means we have not authentically certified organic also.
See, the organic is certified based on farm product. Okay, the processing is not certified properly.
No. Organic has to be the complete chain.
Complete chain. So, okay, because there is some processing which happens afterwards. Okay. Fine. Anyway, thank you very much. These were very technical questions. Thanks for the explanation.
Any other?
Just two bits of information. One, and usually TPD, Trade Policy Division in Commerce, is responsible for TVT and SPS issues. So that could be one place. It's their responsibility to then consult EIC or APIDA or whoever is involved. Second, that we have a, Shashi mentioned embassy participants. Incidentally, we have a special embassy for WTO in Geneva. It's the Indian mission meant for WTO only. Just as by way of added information.
So does it consist of technical people?
Sometimes yes, sometimes no.
These are
They
core.
will possibly have one technical person, either the mostly, in fact, what I understand is they have the plant health, because Agriculture Ministry representative is often there. But I don't think they have food safety and animal health, all three at the same time. They definitely wouldn't.
Yeah, because some of the officers in TPD have gone to Geneva from Commerce Ministry.
Yeah, but how much do they understand of the technical issues?
Yeah, and they were not technical people.
No, because it is very disturbing that CCM export is being stopped for now considerable length of time, I understand. I mean,
okay, any other questions?
Thank you.
Any other questions, please? Somebody was asking recently, one of the entrepreneur was asking from the food sector, do we have any portal just to go and check the certified organic products? Like he's saying, they get a lot of ingredients and everybody is claiming that it's an organic product. But then he says, how do we go and check, verify? Is there a portal?
Anil, do you have any idea on this?
That's what they are asking. I don't know whether it's got anything to do with this today's topic.
I think from, I'm trying to remember the date, 1st of July of 19 or 18. I'm forgetting. Organic products are under regulation of FSSAI.
A list
so
of,
there has to be information available. And they are under, I believe, two systems. Shashi knows. One is the third party normal certification. One is that what is called PGS, Participatory Guarantee Scheme. So there are two systems. So to my mind, on FSI website, there should be information available.
If find out. So it's actually a industrialist who raised this question, because he says what they getting as organic products, they're paying through their nose and prices are so heavy. But otherwise, when they buy it from ordinary this thing, which is not an organic certified, the price is not so much. One of those seats only, because he's also into foods, fats, and oil industry. So he said, let me know if there is a portal, because
I'll find out.
we are all struggling to find out which are the genuine ones, is what he asked. He asked me in one of the chamber session last month. And that's how it is.
I'll find out.
Yeah, thank you.
So I think it's very important for transparency to have all this information in one place, or at least information where a list where all such information can be made available.
Absolutely. See, at the end of the day, ma'am, today everybody is asking in the industry, I would like to know if I have a certificate, I should be in a position to trace how reliable it is. So somewhere it should be there in some portal. You don't expect us to understand all these things, which is we don't have time. As businesses, we don't have time for all this. If I get something, it should be authentic and reliable. And don't come and tell us tomorrow that, no, this is not authentic, this is not reliable, this is not here, that is not here. Then if all these things are floating in the country, why are you not arresting it?
In fact, in our projects which we do in different countries, this is one of the most important things which we address in the first stage, is the transparency, having information on a portal and coordinating that information from different departments.
No, it is actually
a lot on it, but again, it's very difficult and it's not working out in most places.
No, ma'am, it is when you say all these things is voluntary. My question is, like, there has to be a registry. When businesses are regulated, food is regulated, FSSAI should have all those certificates issued in the country, because all those manufacturers, when they are applying for license, they have to upload their certificates.
Definitely must be there, but is it available to public, or is it only available?
Absolutely. So they have to say that, this is what it is and it should be available. The public is saying, and at the end of the day, businesses are saying we will go and check. Users are saying we will go and check. Regulators have to upload all these things, and simple things they're asking. If I'm buying a product, I should know whether the organic certificate shown to me is genuine or not. Where do I go and check? Absolutely. And they're saying, don't tell us that no, the country does not have a system even to check all this. Today, the biggest question is traceability of tracking, traceability only. If there is a certificate, I should be in a position to go and log into a portal and do it.
Yes.
That's all it is. Thank you. Thank you so much for the session, ma'am. Thanks for your time. Very detailed explanation. We'll all have to go back and read and do our homework and try to understand all these things also.
You can always ask me any questions on this. And
thank you. And actually, we must have some industry sessions also like this, maybe once in a while also. This is our consultants learning series, and then we keep asking industry also if there is a requirement for all this. And entrepreneurs also really don't put their foot into all this. They have consultants for everything, for all domains and everything. And it really helps, even because everything is connected at the end of the day. All the standards, certifications, testing, inspections, everything is connected to Global Tree.
And now we are having all these e-sessions and online, so it's so easy for us to.
It is actually.
Of course, the communication is not as great as it is when you are physically present, but still, I suppose.
It is effective. Actually, it is effective. Yes, no, may not be this thing, but hybrid model is going to stay, ma'am. Actually, it's a combination of that. Hybrid is going to be the model, and it's very effective also. Otherwise, we all cannot meet and do things like this. Maybe there is one more on TFEA is what you said. We have covered TPT, SPS. There's one more on TFEA is what the recent one you said. Maybe one session we can have on that also subsequently. Thank you so much. So if there are no questions, I guess we can just wind up the session. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you. Thanks to all the participants for joining the session today.
Thank you.
Thank you
for organizing.
Thank you, sir.